The thunder cracked so violently that Sarah Finley clutched her 3-month-old daughter Emma tighter to her chest, pressing the infant's face against her worn cotton dress to shield her from the lashing rain. Her husband Thomas had promised to return with help hours ago, their wagon wheel shattered beyond repair on this desolate stretch between mining camps. Now, as the storm intensified across the Sierra Nevada foothills, Sarah realized with growing horror that Thomas wasn't coming back. He had abandoned them both to the merciless elements of 1853 California. "Hush now, my sweet girl," Sarah whispered as Emma's frightened cries pierced through the howling wind. Her thin shawl offered little protection against the autumn deluge that had transformed the dirt road into treacherous mud. Night was falling fast, the temperature dropping with each passing minute. With trembling fingers, Sarah loosened her bodice to nurse Emma, hoping to quiet her while she desperately scanned the darkening landscape for shelter. The abandoned mine shaft appeared like an answer to her silent prayers, a small, gaping hole in the hillside partially hidden by overgrown brush. Gathering her remaining strength, Sarah stumbled toward it, her sodden skirts weighing her down with each exhausted step. Inside, the earthen walls provided minimal shelter, but at least the driving rain couldn't reach them. Sarah slumped against the rough-hewn timber support beam, her back pressed against cold stone as she cradled Emma close for warmth. "We'll be all right," she murmured, trying to believe her own words as tears mingled with raindrops on her cheeks. Thomas had taken their money, their horse, everything except the small bundle of baby clothes she'd managed to grab before he rode away. At 22, Sarah found herself utterly alone with an infant in the unforgiving wilderness of Gold Country. Emma eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep against Sarah's chest, but Sarah remained awake, listening to the storm's fury and jumping at every crack of thunder. The hollow rumble of shifting earth above made her heart race. These mines were notorious for collapses, but venturing back into the storm seemed equally perilous. She was trapped between two deadly choices. As the night wore on, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the events that had led her here. She'd met Thomas in St. Louis, captivated by his charming smile and promises of fortune in the California goldfields. Their hasty marriage had shocked her parents, who warned her against following a dreamer westward. Now, as Emma stirred against her, Sarah felt the crushing weight of her naivete. The journey had been brutal, and Thomas's temperament had soured with each disappointing prospect. When she'd given birth to Emma in a canvas tent outside Sacramento, Thomas had looked at their daughter with disappointment rather than love. "Should have been a boy," he'd muttered. Another mouth to feed with nothing to show for it. A sudden crash outside startled Sarah from her memories. At first she feared the mine entrance had collapsed, but then came the distinct sound of hoofbeats splashing through mud. Sarah froze, clutching Emma tighter. Outlaws roamed these hills, and a woman alone would make easy prey. The footsteps grew closer, heavy boots against wet earth. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, praying Emma wouldn't wake and cry. A large silhouette appeared at the entrance, backlit by a flash of lightning. "Hello." A deep voice called, "Anybody in here?" Sarah remained silent, her heart hammering. "I saw tracks leading in," the voice continued, gentler now. "If someone's taking shelter, I mean no harm. Storm's getting worse, going to be a mudslide coming down that hill soon." Another flash of lightning illuminated the stranger's face, rugged features beneath a dripping hat, stubble darkening his jaw. In his hand was a lantern, its glow revealing concerned eyes scanning the darkness. Before Sarah could decide whether to trust this appearance, Emma stirred and let out a piercing wail. The man's attention immediately fixed on their corner. "Madam," he approached slowly, raising the lantern. When its light fell upon Sarah clutching her screaming infant, his expression shifted from surprise to determination. "You can't stay here. This mine could come down any minute." "Who are you?" Sarah managed, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Isaac Quinn," he replied, crouching down to her level, keeping a respectful distance. "I ranch about 3 miles east, was checking on my cattle when I spotted tracks too small for a man's." His eyes moved from Sarah to the baby, That little one can't be more than a few months old." Emma continued to cry, and Sarah instinctively began to rock her. "3 months next week," she replied automatically. Isaac nodded, then glanced anxiously at the mine entrance where water was beginning to stream in more rapidly. "Madam, I don't mean to frighten you, but we need to leave now. I've seen these hillsides give way before." As if confirming his words, a deep groaning sound rumbled above them, followed by a shower of dirt from the ceiling. Emma's cries grew more frantic. "My horse is just outside," Isaac said urgently. "I can get you both to my ranch. It's dry, warm, and safe." Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. She had no choice. Death awaited them here, while this stranger at least offered a chance at survival. Isaac helped her to her feet, then shrugged off his heavy canvas duster and wrapped it around her shoulders. The unexpected kindness brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. They hurried to the entrance where a massive black horse stood patiently in the rain, water streaming off its sleek coat. With surprising gentleness for his large frame, Isaac helped Sarah mount, then handed Emma up to her. The baby's cries subsided slightly as Isaac swung up behind Sarah, one arm securely around her waist to keep her and the child stable. "Hold tight to her," he instructed as he urged the horse forward through the driving rain. Sarah clutched Emma to her chest, feeling the solid warmth of the stranger at her back as they rode through the storm. The journey seemed endless, the rain pelting them mercilessly despite Isaac's attempts to shield them with his body. Emma had fallen into an exhausted sleep, but Sarah remained alert, wondering if she'd exchanged one danger for another. Just when Sarah thought they must surely be lost, lights appeared through the trees, a substantial cabin with smoke rising from the chimney despite the storm. Isaac guided his horse toward the barn first, dismounting quickly before helping Sarah down with Emma. "Let's get you both inside," he said, leading them through the rain to the cabin's porch. Once inside, the contrast between the howling storm and the quiet, warm interior was stark. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across simple but sturdy furniture. Isaac moved efficiently, stirring the fire to greater life before gathering blankets from a trunk. "You're both safe now," he said, draping a wool blanket around Sarah's shoulders. The words were simple but delivered with such quiet certainty that Sarah finally allowed herself to believe them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking as the enormity of what had happened and what might have happened washed over her. Isaac nodded, then busied himself heating water. "You need dry clothes and something warm to drink. I'll fix some tea and find something you can wear." He disappeared into another room, giving Sarah privacy to tend to Emma. Sarah unwrapped her daughter, relieved to find that the multiple layers of blankets had kept her relatively dry. Emma's eyes fluttered open, regarding her mother with solemn contemplation before her tiny mouth worked into what almost looked like a smile. "We're going to be all right," Sarah told her daughter, this time with more conviction than before. When Isaac returned with a man's shirt and a pair of trousers tied with rope, Sarah accepted them gratefully. "They belonged to my sister when she stayed here," he explained, turning his back to give her privacy. "She's back east now, married with children of her own." Sarah changed quickly, grateful for the dry clothes despite their ill fit. The warmth began to seep back into her bones as Isaac handed her a steaming cup of tea laced with honey. "You should eat something too," he said, already moving to the stove where a pot of stew simmered. "And then you can tell me, if you want, how you and the little one came to be in that mine during the worst storm of the season." There was no judgment in his tone, only concern. As Sarah sipped the sweet tea and watched Isaac move about his cabin with quiet efficiency, she realized she had never felt so simultaneously lost and found in all her life. The simple meal of venison stew and cornbread was the most delicious thing Sarah had tasted in months. Isaac insisted she eat her fill, watching with satisfaction as color returned to her pale cheeks. Emma slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a dresser drawer lined with blankets, placed near the fire but not too close. "She's a beautiful child," Isaac commented, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Has your eyes," Sarah glanced up, surprised by the observation. "Thank you. She has her father's chin, though." Her voice faltered as she mentioned Thomas. Isaac nodded, not pushing for more information. Instead, he rose to add another log to the fire. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. "Storm like this could last days," he said, returning to his chair. "You're welcome to stay until it passes, longer if need be." Sarah set down her spoon, knowing she owed this man some explanation. "My husband and I were traveling to Downeyville," she began. "Thomas heard there were good prospects there. Our wagon broke down about 10 miles back. He went for help this morning, but..." She swallowed hard. "I don't think he's coming back." Isaac's expression remained carefully neutral, but his hands tightened briefly on his cup. "What makes you say that? He took our money. And our horse," Sarah admitted, shame coloring her words. "Things haven't been good between us since Emma was born. Before, even, the gold fever changed him, or maybe it just showed what was always there." Isaac's eyes moved to the sleeping baby, then back to Sarah. "Some men aren't made for hardship," he said quietly, "or responsibility." "No," Sarah agreed, "though I was fool enough not to see it before we left Missouri." She fought back tears. "I have nowhere to go now, no money, no family out here." "You have a roof tonight," Isaac said firmly, "and tomorrow we can figure out the next step. One day at a time is how we survive out here." That night, Isaac insisted Sarah take his bed while he slept on a pallet near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah found sleep elusive, listening to the storm and to Isaac's deep, even breathing across the room. Emma woke twice for feeding, and each time Isaac stirred but pretended to remain asleep, giving Sarah privacy. By morning, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Sarah awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon, finding Isaac already dressed and cooking breakfast. Emma was awake in her makeshift cradle, quietly watching the shadows from the fire dance across the ceiling. "Good morning," Isaac said, his voice warm but respectful. "Thought you might be hungry." Sarah smoothed her tangled hair self-consciously, aware of how she must look after yesterday's ordeal. "You've been too kind already." Isaac shook his head. "Kindness is free, Miss Sarah, one of the few things that is out here." He placed a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "I need to check on some fence lines today, see what damage the storm did. You're welcome to stay here where it's dry." "I couldn't impose further," Sarah protested weakly, though the thought of venturing out again with Emma filled her with dread. "It's no imposition," Isaac replied. "Truth be told, it's nice having someone else around." He hesitated. "Been on my own since my brother died 2 years back." Something in his tone made Sarah look up from her plate. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Isaac nodded, his expression momentarily distant. "James and I came out in '49. Did all right for ourselves, not with gold but with land. Built this place together." His eyes refocused on Sarah. "Influenza took him winter before last. And your sister, the one whose clothes I'm wearing," Catherine went back east after James died. "She has a family in Pennsylvania." Isaac poured more coffee. Ranch was too quiet for her after losing him. Sarah understood immediately that there was more to that story. Perhaps James had been more than a brother to Catherine, but she didn't pry. The West was full of complicated arrangements and reimagined families. "Rest today," Isaac said, changing the subject. "There's plenty of food. I'll be back before sundown." After Isaac left, Sarah explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was larger than it first appeared, with 3 rooms: the main living area with the kitchen, Isaac's bedroom, and a smaller room that seemed to function as storage. Everything was neat and orderly, though decidedly masculine in its simplicity. A bookshelf held a surprising number of volumes history, a few novels, practical guides to ranching and farming, even a book of poetry. On the mantel stood a daguerreotype of 2 men and a young woman, all with similar features, the Quinn siblings, Sarah assumed. Outside, through the window, Sarah could see that the ranch was substantial: a large barn, corrals, and in the distance, pastures where cattle grazed. Beyond that, rolling hills rose toward the mountains, still shrouded in mist from the storm. Emma began to fuss, and Sarah lifted her daughter, walking her around the cabin while singing softly. The simple domestic act in this unfamiliar place brought an unexpected sense of comfort. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something like peace. As promised, Isaac returned before sunset, his clothes mud-splattered but his expression satisfied. "Lost 2 calves to the flooding," he reported, "but the rest of the herd is fine." He glanced around the cabin, noticing the swept floor and the stew simmering on the stove. "You didn't have to cook." "I wanted to," Sarah said. "It's the least I could do." Isaac smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and something warm unfurled in Sarah's chest. "It smells wonderful," he said. They ate together, the conversation easier than the night before. Isaac told her about his ranch, about his plans to expand his herd in the spring, about the community of scattered homesteaders and the small trading post 5 miles away. "What will you do?" he asked finally, the question gentle but unavoidable. Sarah looked down at Emma, sleeping again in her drawer cradle. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some skills sewing, cooking, basic arithmetic. Perhaps there's work in Downeyville." Isaac nodded slowly. "There might be towns growing with the mining operations." He hesitated. "There's also work here if you're interested." Sarah looked up, surprised. "Here? This place needs a woman's touch," Isaac said, gesturing around. "And I could use help with the accounts, the garden come spring. I'd pay you fair wages, provide room and board for you and Emma." He rushed to add, "No strings attached. You'd have the small bedroom, complete privacy. If you decide to move on later, I'd understand." Sarah studied him, searching for any hint of impropriety in his offer, but found only sincerity. Still, she hesitated. People would talk. "People always talk," Isaac replied with a slight shrug. "But my nearest neighbors are 3 miles away, and they know me well enough not to gossip." He leaned forward. "Miss Sarah, I'm offering employment, nothing more. You seem like a capable woman who's had some bad luck. I need help around here, and you need a safe place for you and your daughter. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." It was the most practical solution to her desperate situation, yet Sarah couldn't help wondering if accepting meant giving up on her dreams altogether. Then again, what dreams remained? The gold fantasy had died long before Thomas abandoned them. "I'll stay through the winter," she decided. "By spring, I'll have saved enough to make other arrangements if needed." Isaac nodded, clearly pleased but trying not to show it. "That's settled then." He rose to his feet. "I'll move my things to the main room tomorrow." That night, lying in Isaac's bed for the second time, Sarah listened to the rain's gentle patter against the roof and wondered what her parents would think of her current situation. Living under the same roof as an unmarried man would have scandalized them, but she suspected they would prefer it to her freezing to death with their granddaughter in a collapsing mine shaft. "We're survivors, Emma," she whispered to her sleeping child. "And sometimes surviving means making difficult choices." The days quickly settled into a routine. Each morning, Isaac rose before dawn to tend to the cattle and horses. Sarah prepared breakfast and began her daily chores, cleaning, mending, cooking, keeping the accounts in the leather-bound ledger Isaac entrusted to her. Emma spent her days alternating between sleeping in her cradle, now a proper one that Isaac had retrieved from the storage shed, explaining it had belonged to his sister's first child, and watching the world from a blanket near wherever Sarah worked. Isaac kept his word about respecting her privacy. He slept on a pallet in the main room, never entered her bedroom without knocking, and maintained a careful distance even during their meals together. Yet Sarah found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders as he chopped wood, the gentleness of his hands when he occasionally held Emma, the rare but transformative nature of his smile. As November turned to December, the weather grew colder. Snow dusted the mountain peaks visible from the ranch, though the valley where they resided remained merely frosty. Isaac worked longer hours, preparing the ranch for winter, reinforcing the barn, ensuring adequate feed for the animals, smoking meat and storing preserves. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Emma cradled against Isaac's chest while Sarah mended one of his shirts. He broke their comfortable silence. "Christmas is coming in a few weeks." Sarah's needle paused mid-stitch. She'd lost track of the days, hadn't realized the holiday was approaching. So it is. I thought we might ride into the trading post next week, pick up some supplies, maybe something special for Christmas dinner. His eyes dropped to Emma, who had fallen asleep against him. And perhaps something for the little one. She's too young to remember Christmas, Sarah pointed out, though she was touched by his thoughtfulness. Maybe so, Isaac agreed, but her mother isn't. Something in his tone made Sarah look up from her sewing. Every child deserves some joy at Christmas, and every mother deserves to see it. Sarah swallowed past the sudden tightness in her throat. That's very kind of you. Isaac carefully handed the sleeping Emma back to Sarah, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Not kindness, he said quietly. Just right. The trip to Henderson's trading post the following week marked Emma's first journey since arriving at the ranch. Isaac insisted on taking the wagon rather than riding horseback, creating a nest of blankets for Sarah and Emma in the back. It's slower, he admitted, but safer for the little one. The trading post was a sprawling wooden building with a wide porch, surrounded by hitching posts where several horses and mules were already tethered. Inside, it smelled of coffee, tobacco, leather, and the hundreds of other items that crowded the shelves and hung from the rafters. Isaac Quinn, boomed a barrel-chested man with an impressive gray beard. Thought you might have washed away in that storm last month. Takes more than rain to drown me, Henderson, Isaac replied good-naturedly, then turned to Sarah. Miss Sarah, this is Walter Henderson, owner of this fine establishment. Walter, this is Miss Sarah Finley and her daughter Emma. Henderson's bushy eyebrows rose slightly as he regarded Sarah and the baby, but his welcome was warm. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Finley. Any friend of Isaac's is welcome here. Sarah nodded politely, aware of the curious glances from the few other customers in the store. Henderson's wife emerged from a back room, her kind face lighting up at the sight of Emma. A baby. Oh, it's been too long since we've had a little one visit, she exclaimed, approaching Sarah. May I? Sarah hesitated only briefly before allowing Mrs. Henderson to coo over Emma, who regarded the stranger with solemn interest. Sarah is helping me with the ranch accounts and household, Isaac explained to the Hendersons, his tone casual but deliberate. Her husband abandoned them during that big storm. It was a simple explanation that offered just enough information to discourage gossip while establishing Sarah as a respectable woman in difficult circumstances. Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for Isaac's thoughtfulness. Well, that's a shame for him and a blessing for you, Isaac, Mrs. Henderson declared, handing Emma back to Sarah. This place has been too empty since Catherine left. While Isaac discussed cattle prices with Henderson, Mrs. Henderson Martha, she insisted Sarah call her, showed Sarah the selection of fabrics and notions. We don't get many luxuries out here, she confided, but I make sure Walter stocks good quality essentials. Sarah selected some sturdy cotton for baby clothes, splurging on a small length of soft flannel with tiny blue flowers. Martha insisted on giving her a skein of wool yarn at no charge. For the little one's Christmas stocking, she explained with a wink. Meanwhile, Isaac was filling the wagon with supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, ammunition, tools, and a few items he kept hidden from Sarah's view. The entire time, he was careful to include Sarah in conversations with other customers who wandered in, introducing her simply as Miss Sarah, who's helping at the ranch. On the journey back, with Emma sleeping peacefully and the winter sun warming their faces, Sarah turned to Isaac. Thank you for what you said at the store, about Thomas, I mean. Isaac kept his eyes on the road, seemed the simplest explanation. It was kind of you to preserve my reputation. Isaac glanced at her then, his expression serious. Your reputation needs no preservation, Miss Sarah. You've done nothing wrong. After a moment, he added more softly, but I know how people can talk, and I wouldn't want to make things harder for you or Emma. The simple decency of this statement, so at odds with Thomas's constant complaints about how she was a burden, brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, focusing on the landscape passing by. Mrs. Henderson mentioned your sister again, she said, changing the subject. You must miss her. I do, Isaac admitted, Catherine was always the heart of our family, made this place a home." He smiled faintly. "She writes regularly, sends drawings from my nieces and nephews. Why didn't you return east with her?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's a fair question," Isaac replied, not seeming offended. "This land is part of me now. James and I built something here, not just a ranch, but a life. Leaving would feel like abandoning him somehow." He paused. "And Catherine has her husband's family now. They're good people. She belongs there." Something in his tone suggested deeper waters. "Were you ever married, Mr. Quinn?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself. Isaac's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "No," he said after a moment. "Came close once, back in Ohio before we headed west. Elizabeth Harwood. Her father owned the largest mill in the county." His expression grew distant. "She chose someone with more certain prospects when gold fever struck me." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. Isaac shrugged. "She made the sensible choice. I was young, full of dreams, but short on sense." His eyes met Sarah's briefly. "Sometimes I think we're granted mercies we don't recognize until years later." The wagon hit a rut, jolting them enough to wake Emma, who began to fuss. The conversation naturally shifted to more immediate concerns, but Sarah found herself pondering Isaac's words long after they returned to the ranch. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that dusted the ranch in white. Isaac spent the morning hunting and returned triumphantly with a wild turkey. "Christmas dinner," he announced, holding up his prize. Sarah had been busy in his absence, using the last of the apples stored in the root cellar to bake a pie, and fashioning small decorations from pine cones, red berries, and scraps of ribbon. She'd also completed a tiny stocking for Emma from the wool Martha Henderson had given her. When Isaac entered the cabin and saw the simple decorations brightening the main room, he stopped short, his expression one of surprise and something deeper that Sarah couldn't quite name. "Is it too much?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," he said quickly. "It's perfect, just been a while since this place felt like Christmas." That evening, after a simple but hearty supper, they sat before the fire drinking coffee laced with the special whiskey Isaac had produced from his private store. Emma lay sleeping in her cradle, her tiny stocking hung from a nail beside the fireplace. "I have something for you," Isaac said, reaching behind his chair to produce a package wrapped in plain brown paper. "For Christmas." Sarah accepted it with surprise. "I haven't anything for you," she protested. Isaac gestured around the decorated cabin. "You've given plenty already." Sarah carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful shawl of soft blue wool. "Isaac," she breathed, running her fingers over the fine material, "it's beautiful." "Saw you admiring it at Henderson's," he explained, looking pleased at her reaction. "Thought it matched your eyes." The personal observation made Sarah's cheeks warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire or the whiskey in her coffee. She draped the shawl around her shoulders, immediately enveloped in its warmth. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "It's the finest gift I've received in a very long time." Isaac nodded, seemingly unable to find words. Something shifted in the air between them, a quiet acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing over the past weeks. Neither spoke of it directly, but as they sat together watching the fire burn down to embers, Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of home, that she had never experienced with Thomas. Winter settled fully over the ranch in January. Snow fell more frequently, though rarely deep enough to prevent Isaac from tending to his cattle. Sarah kept the cabin warm and orderly, finding unexpected joy in the simple routine of their days. Emma grew stronger, beginning to roll over and reach for objects, her personality emerging in bright smiles and curious coos. One bitterly cold night, with wind howling around the cabin's sturdy walls, Sarah awoke to Emma's unusual crying. Touching her daughter's forehead, she was alarmed to find it burning hot. "Isaac," she called, wrapping Emma in a blanket and hurrying to the main room where he slept. "Isaac, Emma's ill." He was awake instantly, moving with a sureness that calmed Sarah's rising panic. "Let me see her," he said, gently taking the wailing infant. His large hand cradled Emma's head as he assessed her condition. She's definitely fevered. How long has she been like this? She was fussy at bedtime, but I thought she was just tired, Sarah said, guilt washing over her. I should have noticed sooner. Children fall ill quickly, Isaac said reassuringly. No point in blame. He handed Emma back to Sarah. I have willow bark for tea. It will help reduce her fever, and there's mustard for a plaster. While Sarah held and comforted Emma, Isaac moved efficiently around the cabin, heating water and preparing the remedies. His calm competence was a balm to Sarah's fear. How do you know what to do? She asked as he measured herbs into the pot. My sister had 4 children, he explained. I helped with them when they were sick. And out here you learn to doctor yourself and your animals or you don't survive long. They worked together through the night, taking turns holding Emma, applying cool cloths to her forehead, and encouraging her to take tiny sips of the willow bark tea. By dawn, her fever had broken, and she fell into an exhausted sleep against Sarah's chest. You should rest too, Isaac said gently, touching Sarah's shoulder. I'll watch her while you sleep. Too tired to argue, Sarah allowed Isaac to settle her in his chair by the fire, Emma still cradled in her arms. He draped a blanket over them both, his hand lingering briefly against Sarah's cheek in a gesture that might have been checking for fever but felt like something more. When Sarah awoke several hours later, she found Isaac seated nearby, whittling a small piece of wood while keeping watch over them. Emma still slept peacefully, her breathing normal, her forehead cool. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice rough with sleep. Isaac looked up, his tired eyes warming. Nothing to thank me for, that's what family does. The word hung in the air between them, family. It was both presumptuous and exactly right. In that moment, Sarah realized that somewhere during these weeks of living under Isaac's roof, the 3 of them had indeed become a kind of family. Emma recovered quickly, her resilient infant constitution bouncing back from the fever with no lasting effects. But something had changed between Sarah and Isaac. The careful distance he had maintained began to dissolve. His hand would linger when passing a dish at supper. She would catch him watching her as she worked. They talked more openly in the evenings, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their disappointments. February arrived with more snow and bitter cold. Valentine's Day passed unmarked except for a single red ribbon Isaac tied around Emma's cradle post, causing Sarah to blush furiously when she discovered it. He said nothing about it, but the small gesture spoke volumes. As the month progressed, Isaac began making more frequent trips to the trading post, returning with supplies but also news. Word around Henderson's is that your husband was seen in Sacramento, he reported one evening. Apparently headed east back over the mountains. Sarah looked up from her mending. How do they know it was Thomas? Description matches what you told me, Isaac said carefully, and he was, boasting about a claim he'd sold, showing off money. The confirmation of Thomas's betrayal should have hurt, but Sarah felt only a dull resignation. He won't be coming back then. No, Isaac agreed. I don't believe he will. Sarah returned to her sewing, aware of Isaac watching her carefully. I'm not heartbroken, she said finally, if that's what concerns you. Not heartbroken, Isaac repeated, but you are married still. The statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah set down her work. In name only, she said quietly. Thomas abandoned his vows long before he left us in that storm, Isaac nodded slowly. Even so, the law sees it differently. The law, Sarah echoed, a bitter edge to her voice. The same law that would give Thomas rights to Emma if he returned despite his abandonment. The same law that would leave me with nothing if I sought divorce. The very same, Isaac agreed, his expression grim. It's not right, but it is reality. They fell silent, both aware of the barrier that stood between them, a husband who was gone but not legally absent, a marriage that was dead but not dissolved. In the eyes of society and law, Sarah remained a married woman, regardless of abandonment. Spring will be here soon, Isaac said finally. Have you given thought to what comes next? You mentioned moving on when winter ended. Sarah looked at Emma, now sleeping peacefully in her cradle. I have thought about it, she admitted, but I find I have no desire to leave. She met Isaac's gaze directly. Unless you wish us to go. No, he said immediately, his voice rough with emotion. I don't wish that at all. Their eyes held, a silent understanding passing between them. The situation was complicated, the path forward unclear, but one thing was certain: neither wanted to part from the other. March brought thawing temperatures and the first signs of spring. The snow receded from the lower pastures, and Isaac began preparing for calving season. Sarah planted an early garden, turning the soil in the plot behind the cabin while Emma watched from a blanket in the dappled shade of a budding oak tree. On a particularly mild afternoon, Isaac rode up to the cabin earlier than expected. Sarah, elbow deep in bread dough, looked up in surprise as he entered. His expression was grave. "What is it?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Thomas is back," he said without preamble. "In Downieville." Sarah's hands stilled in the dough. "How do you know?" "Henderson told me." "Apparently he's been asking about you." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Claims he never abandoned you, that you were separated in the storm, and he's been searching ever since." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Searching while spending his money in Sacramento? He's lost it all, from what Henderson gathered." "Gambling, mostly." Isaac moved closer. "Sarah, he knows you're here. Someone at the trading post mentioned you were staying at my ranch." Fear curled in Sarah's stomach. "What does he want, you?" Isaac said simply. "Or more likely, a place to stay and access to whatever money you might have saved." Sarah instinctively glanced toward Emma. "He has no interest in her. He made that clear enough." "Maybe not," Isaac agreed, "but she could be useful to him in controlling you." The thought of Thomas using Emma as leverage made Sarah's blood run cold. "What should I do?" Isaac hesitated. "Legally, he has rights as your husband and Emma's father. If you refuse to return to him, he could make trouble." "I won't go back to him," Sarah said firmly. "Never." "I wouldn't expect you to," Isaac replied. His expression softened slightly. "There may be another option, though it's not without risk." "What option?" "We could leave," Isaac said quietly. "All three of us. Start fresh somewhere else, further north perhaps, or west to Oregon Territory." Sarah stared at him, processing his suggestion. "You would abandon your ranch, everything you've built here?" Isaac's gaze was steady. "Land and cattle can be replaced, some things can't." The implication was clear: she and Emma had become more important to him than his property or position. The realization stole Sarah's breath. "Isaac," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. They both turned toward the window to see a rider coming up the path, a thin man on an exhausted-looking horse. "Thomas," Sarah whispered, recognizing her husband's lanky frame even at a distance. Isaac's expression hardened. "Stay inside," he said, moving toward the door. "Let me handle this." "No," Sarah said, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is my fight." She stepped outside onto the porch, aware of Isaac following closely behind her. Thomas reined his horse to a stop in the yard, his once handsome face now haggard and unshaven. His clothes were travel-worn, his eyes bloodshot. "There you are," he called, his voice carrying the slight slur of a man who'd fortified himself with whiskey before a confrontation. "Been looking all over for you, Sarah." "No, you haven't," she replied evenly. "You left us to die in that storm." Thomas dismounted unsteadily. "Now that's not fair. The horse spooked through me. By the time I got my bearings, the storm had washed away all tracks." He attempted a winning smile that came across as a grimace. "Been half out of my mind with worry." "Save your lies for someone who doesn't know you," Sarah said coldly. "What do you want, Thomas?" His facade cracked slightly. "Is that any way to greet your husband? I've come to take you home." His gaze shifted to Isaac, standing protectively behind Sarah. "Unless you found other arrangements already." The insinuation made Sarah's cheeks burn with anger. "Mr. Quinn saved our lives and offered honest employment when you abandoned us. That's more than you ever did." Thomas's expression darkened. "Watch your tongue, woman. You're still my wife, and that's still my child." He took a step forward. "Now pack your things. We're leaving." Isaac moved to stand beside Sarah. "Miss Finley isn't going anywhere she doesn't wish to go," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Neither is Emma." Thomas's hand moved toward his belt where a pistol was holstered. "This isn't your concern, rancher. A man has rights to his family." "A man forfeits those rights when he abandons them in a storm to die," Isaac replied, not backing down. Thomas drew his pistol, pointing it unsteadily at Isaac. I'm taking what's mine. Time seemed to slow. Sarah was acutely aware of Emma sleeping inside, of Isaac's steady presence beside her, of the distance between Thomas's wavering gun and the doorway to the cabin. Put the gun down, Finley, Isaac said, his voice level. You're drunk and making poor decisions. Poor decisions. Thomas laughed bitterly. Like trusting my wife hasn't been whoring herself to you all winter, the crude accusation pushed Sarah past fear into fury. Enough, Thomas. You left us with nothing in a storm with a 3-month-old baby. You took our money, our horse, everything. We nearly died in that mine shaft before Mr. Quinn found us. Mine shaft, Thomas repeated, momentarily confused. Yes, the abandoned mine where we sheltered after you rode away, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. Where I held our daughter and wondered if we would freeze to death or be crushed when the ceiling collapsed. Thomas's gun hand lowered slightly. I didn't know, you didn't care, Sarah interrupted. You've never cared for anyone but yourself. Not me, not Emma, not even the child I lost on the journey west because you wouldn't stop when I was ill. Isaac glanced at her sharply, this revelation clearly new to him. Sarah had never spoken of the miscarriage she'd suffered near Fort Laramie, the son she'd buried in an unmarked grave beside the trail while Thomas complained about the delay. That wasn't my fault, Thomas protested, but his voice lacked conviction. None of it ever is, according to you, Sarah said wearily. Well, I'm done, Thomas. You're not my husband in any way that matters. You have no claim to Emma or to me. Thomas's expression twisted with anger and he raised the gun again. The law says different. The law requires evidence, came a new voice from behind Thomas. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Blackwood from Downeyville, accompanied by Walter Henderson, riding into the yard. Evidence like witnesses who saw you gambling away money in Sacramento while claiming your family was lost. Thomas paled. That's a lie. Is it? Sheriff Blackwood dismounted, his hand resting casually on his own holstered weapon. Because I've got signed statements from 3 different men who heard you boasting about leaving your wife and kid to fend for themselves while you enjoyed your newfound freedom. Thomas's gun hand wavered. You can't prove anything. Maybe not, the sheriff conceded, but I can arrest you for threatening a man with a firearm on his own property that I witnessed myself. He nodded toward Isaac. Lower the weapon, Finley. Don't make this worse for yourself. For a moment it seemed Thomas might resist. Then, with a curse, he lowered the gun. Walter came and got me when he heard Finley asking after your whereabouts, Sheriff Blackwood explained to Sarah as he moved to disarm Thomas. Said there might be trouble. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The sheriff secured Thomas's hands behind his back. Mrs. Finley, given the circumstances, I'd recommend you consider filing for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. Judge Wilson is fair-minded. With these witnesses' statements, you'd likely be successful. Sarah nodded, hardly daring to believe this sudden turn of events. I'll need you to come to Downeyville tomorrow to make a formal statement, the sheriff continued. Both of you, he added, looking at Isaac, will be there, Isaac confirmed. As the sheriff led Thomas away, Sarah felt the strength leave her legs. Isaac's arm came around her waist, supporting her. Let's get you inside, he murmured. Walter Henderson tipped his hat. Martha sends her regards, he said to tell you she'll be praying for a favorable outcome. Once inside, with the door firmly closed, Sarah sank into a chair. I can't believe it's over, she whispered. Not quite yet, Isaac cautioned, kneeling before her, but soon, perhaps. Emma began to stir in her cradle, and Sarah moved automatically to tend to her. The familiar weight of her daughter in her arms centered her, bringing clarity to the chaos of the day's events. I meant what I said, Isaac told her as she returned to her chair with Emma. About leaving if necessary, the offer stands. Sarah studied him, this man who had rescued them from the storm, given them shelter and safety, who now offered to abandon everything he'd built for their sake. I won't ask that of you, she said softly. This is your home. Home isn't a place, Isaac replied, his voice rough with emotion. It's people, it's where you belong. He hesitated, then continued more boldly, "These past months, you and Emma have made this house a home again. I don't want to lose that." The naked honesty in his expression made Sarah's heart ache. "Nor do I," she admitted. "But there are proper ways to do things, especially with a child involved. If the divorce is granted when," Isaac interrupted gently, "when it's granted." Sarah smiled faintly. "When it's granted, then we can discuss what comes next." Her eyes met his. "Properly." Isaac nodded, understanding her meaning. A divorced woman would face scrutiny enough without adding impropriety to her situation. "I can be patient," he said. "Some things are worth waiting for." The legal proceedings moved faster than Sarah had dared hope. Judge Wilson, hearing the evidence of Thomas's abandonment and subsequent threats, granted the divorce in early April. Thomas, facing charges of public drunkenness and threatening behavior, left Downeyville immediately after the ruling, reportedly heading for the silver mines in Nevada Territory. On a perfect spring day, with wildflowers dotting the meadows and new calves frolicking in the pastures, Isaac took Sarah and Emma on a picnic beside the small creek that ran through his property. Emma, now 8 months old, sat supported by blankets, chewing contentedly on a wooden rattle Isaac had carved for her. "I've been thinking about names," Isaac said as they finished their meal. Sarah looked at him questioningly. "Names for the ranch," he clarified. "It's always just been the Quinn place, but it deserves better." "What did you have in mind?" Isaac gazed across the creek to where his cattle grazed peacefully. "I was thinking of Safe Haven." Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the echo of his words from that stormy night. "You're both safe now. It's perfect," she said softly. Isaac turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "Sarah, I know it hasn't been long since the divorce, 4 weeks, she supplied, a smile playing at her lips. 4 weeks, he agreed. Not long by most standards, though it feels like forever to me. He took her hand. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I know what I feel." His eyes, direct and honest, met hers. "I love you, Sarah. You and Emma both. I want us to be a family officially, properly, in all the ways that matter." Sarah's heart swelled. She had known this was coming, had hoped for it, yet the reality of hearing the words brought tears to her eyes. "We already are a family," she said, "but I would be honored to make it official." Isaac's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right person." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma let out a delighted gurgle as if giving her approval. Sarah laughed through her tears. "I think she agrees with this arrangement. Smart girl," Isaac said, leaning over to kiss Sarah's lips gently, just like her mother. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with the Hendersons, Sheriff Blackwood, and a handful of neighboring ranchers as witnesses. Emma, dressed in a gown Sarah had sewn from the blue flowered flannel, was passed among the guests, charming everyone with her sunny smiles. "Never seen Isaac look so happy," Walter Henderson remarked to his wife as they watched the new family accept congratulations. "It's as it should be," Martha replied. "That man's been alone too long, and that baby needs a proper father." By summer's end, Safe Haven Ranch was thriving. Isaac's cattle fetched good prices, Sarah's garden produced abundantly, and Emma took her first tottering steps across the cabin floor, falling into Isaac's waiting arms with peals of laughter. In the cool of the evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in gold and crimson, Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night, the storm?" Isaac's arm tightened around her. "Often," he admitted. "How close I came to riding past that mine shaft, how easily I might never have found you." "I've been thinking," Sarah said, placing her hand over his. "If not for that storm, if not for Thomas leaving us, we would never have met. Something terrible brought me the greatest blessing of my life." Isaac kissed her temple. "Some might call that providence." "I call it a miracle," Sarah replied, watching as a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, a fitting sign for a wish already granted. 1 year to the day after Isaac found Sarah and Emma in the abandoned mine shaft, a second miracle joined their family. Isaac James Quinn, Jr., was born as another autumn storm rattled the windows of Safe Haven Ranch. Unlike the storm that had brought his parents together, this one was met not with fear but with joy, as it heralded new life rather than threatened it. "He has your eyes," Sarah told Isaac as he cradled his newborn son beside the bed where she rested, Emma curled asleep against her side. "And your determination," Isaac replied, noting the strong grip of the infant's tiny hand around his finger. "He'll be as stubborn as his mother, I expect." "A fine quality in this family," Sarah teased, reaching out to touch the downy head of her son. "We're all rather persistent, aren't we?" Isaac smiled, looking from his wife to his daughter to his son, the family he had never expected to find, created from the unlikeliest of circumstances. "Persistent enough to weather any storm," he agreed. "Together." Outside, the rain began to ease, and through a break in the clouds, the first stars of evening appeared, bright points of light guiding them forward into a future built on love, trust, and the safety they had found in each other's arms.